let's introduce our second oldest grandson. Jaden, you want to come in?
Yeah.
Come over here.
There he is. He's a little tall.
This is our second oldest grandson, Jaden Scanapico.
Hi.
And he's a junior in high school. Really like to hear from you. Would you please email this video to 5 friends, and we would like you to send us comments, because if you would like for us to expand on what we've talked about tonight, we would like to know that. So send it to at least 5 people, and try to watch, over time, because we feel like we're giving very good information to help with what's going on in our country today. And we've lived this, okay? So it's not just book stuff. He's an academician, so he knows a whole lot. So please comment, send it to at least 5 people that you know, tell them to watch it, and like us and subscribe.
Well, welcome to episode 5 of Crossing the Color Line. And we want to remind everyone, please, to keep this thing rolling, to like and subscribe. We're doing pretty good, and I'd like to keep this going. And I would also love it if some of you would comment, ask questions. Last time we did have a comment. Glenn said something, and what I would like is, if you want to say things like that, I'd like you to look at the idea behind it, what it is about us, or about our topics, about our marriage, about black people, about the country, whatever, whatever it is. Okay, you can cut the schoolyard name calling and all that crap. That doesn't impress anybody. But come up with an idea. I don't like the way blacks seem to be getting everything from the government. The government bends over backwards. And in my school, I go to school and I see these black kids, they get all kinds of, whatever it is. Comment. We will address it. You can do it while I do not know the technology. But while we're talking, people can, I guess, comment and so forth, So do so, please. Today,
You didn't introduce yourself.
Do I need to?
Mm-hmm.
At this point?
Yeah.
I thought I was famous already. Okay. Well, my name is Pat Barrett. The lady sitting next to me is my wife, Letha Barrett. Letha. Okay. Anything?
For 53 years.
Of marriage. Marital bliss, right? Marital bliss.
Absolute marital
and there's a topic right there that has nothing to do with race. Marriage.
It has to do with culture.
Survival. Well, cultures, and I was thinking about that today. And I wasn't going to use this as my topic. I'll just give you a quick example. There's something called CPT. And some of you may know that stands for Colored People's Time. My experience is most ethnic groups, Hispanics, Mexicans, Italians, Jews, Asians, have a little saying like that, because a lot of people organize their time differently from, what do we want to call, like my cultural background is standard average American, all right? We're the Heinz 57 variety. And up until recently, we were the dominant group. Now that's changed, and that brings me to what I wanted to talk about today, which is what motivated us to do this series and what our current situation is.
Well, we were motivated, but our grandson really got us to do this, and it's been wonderful.
Yeah, and he really took the bull by the horns, and he knows the technology, which we don't.
We don't.
And so forth and so on. In fact, right now, I've had to pull up one of my favorite news shows, AM Joy, on the computer because my wife decided to change our service provider for the TV, and I can't watch.
Now, you
shows.
see how I get blamed for that.
Well, and that brings me to CPT. Because I was thinking we were supposed to start at 6 o'clock, or at least Joshua was going to get here at 6. And we were going to get everything set up and start by 6:30 at the latest. It's quite a bit later than that. And Joshua got here, and we got set up. My wife is still downstairs baking my grandson, the other grandson. I don't know where Jaden is.
His cake, because today
His cake.
is his birthday.
It's his birthday, and he needs a cake. I
And he
understand
asked
that.
his Mima if she would make his favorite cake, which is a Texas sheet cake that my mother-in-law gave me about 46 years ago when our son was born. And he's going to be 49. So that's when they decided, when they tasted the cake and they got old enough, and we'd say, what kind of cake do you want for your birthday? The kids would say, my daughter and my son would say, Texas sheet cake. Now the grandkids are saying, Texas sheet cake. So I made him a Texas sheet cake. And you see I'm eating because part
because
of the
she's
reason,
late. That's the whole point.
See, here we go again.
She's late.
You know how husbands and wives are. We were talking to a friend about a book that she's helping me write. And we talked about everything, including some things that he wanted to talk about. He brought about 7 books down for Judith to see. So they're discussing the books and everything, and we went through the pictures, and so it took longer. So that's one of the reasons I'm eating late.
So what?
Okay? So forgive me.
So what? Forget the clock. Just keep doing whatever you're doing,
That's
and
right.
you'll get around to it eventually, which is a great attitude.
Wonderful.
I'm watching the clock, ready to go. Okay, that's a cultural thing, I'm sure. We can talk about that. But when we talk about culture, I have a lot of stuff to reference. Again, I have kind of an academic approach, but there have been people that have written wonderful books about African American culture and how it works with or doesn't work with the dominant culture, or soon to be subdominant culture.
And that upsets a lot of people.
That gets us to the election, which is what I wanted to talk about today. I wanted to bring our discussion up to the current time. We've given you, in the last 4 episodes, some personal background and a little bit of some of the things that we went through as a black and white couple, and my wife went through as a black person living in the United States in the 1940s, the 50s, the 60s. Things began to change.
Was I living in the 40s?
Yeah, you were born in 42.
Oh.
So we have had recently in the election something we might call, some people have called, the white backlash. All right?
Absolutely.
So supposedly white people have something to be really upset about. Okay? They're losing ground. They're really losing ground.
They think.
Now we find that very strange because we don't see that happening. Most boardrooms and high, corporate culture, blah, 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 a lot of white folks there. A lot of white men. You look at Trump's cabinet. We have Betsy DeVos, female.
A white, ignorant woman.
Okay, there's not necessarily a connection between being white and ignorant or a woman and ignorant.
A white and wealthy.
She just happens to be an ignorant person, and I mentioned this in another episode where I said she actually had the nerve to say that historically black colleges and universities were founded as a kind of voucher system, free choice in your education. No, they were founded because black people weren't allowed to go to the white schools. Which brings me to...
Well,
okay, I'm on a roll here.
okay, go ahead.
Okay, let me just
I'll
finish.
Remember Betsy DeVos.
Okay.
Okay.
What I wanted to say is, the crap you're seeing from Trump and his supporters is nothing new.
It's been here all
This
the
started in 1954 with the Supreme Court decision saying it was not constitutional when everyone's paying taxes to tell black parents that they could not send their kids to the same schools that white students were going to. Of course, the excuse was, well, the schools are equally good. And a lot of documentation had come in showing nothing like that was the case, that black students routinely got the short end of the stick in terms of schooling. I remember one of my mother's husbands, who was from Arkansas, North Little Rock, Arkansas. And as we went through Birmingham, Alabama, we moved to Dothan because there's a military base there, and he was in the Army. And he pointed to this big new high school, and he said, "See, that's for the colored kids. It's all this money is being spent on the. It's fine. It's all equal." That was in 1956, 2 years after the Supreme Court decision. Whites began resisting, and they called it the resistance. That's what it was called. You talk about the resistance now against Trump. The white people in the South had something that they called the resistance. Virginia closed all of its public schools rather than integrate.
And what year was that?
I don't remember, but it was right after the Supreme Court decision, so I'm assuming 55 or so. And also, and I want you to put this in your pipe and smoke it, when you talk about things like charter schools, one of the major scholars of education in this country, Diane Ravitch, has charted the course of charter schools back to what was called white academies, when the Supreme Court said you could not have separate schools for blacks and whites. Whites, and this is all over the South, whites turned their schools over to the black students and opened up private schools called academies for white kids. Now, the details of the history of that I can't give you, but I know when I lived in Dothan, Alabama in 1956 and went to school as a high school sophomore. Now, Joshua, I have a technical question. If we use what everyone now calls, and this is another topic, the N-word, is it going to censor something? Is it going to get us kicked off the internet? Can we use the N-word? I'm not going to use it, just in case.
No, I will use it. Because that's
okay. I'm just saying, if then people can't access the video, that's a problem.
Oh, they can, because that word is minor.
No, I see all the time with people. Okay, we should have planned this out. Let me just say N-word.
If somebody reports you or and if YouTube deems that it does not follow the, I think it's called like the social guideline, community guidelines.
Yeah.
If it violates community guidelines, they will take down the video.
She can use it if she wants. I won't.
And then we can edit it, and then we can read.
What I'm going to say won't make sense, so I'll just say N-word. My Latin teacher, spent a little bit of every class period lecturing this boy from the north about the N's.
And this is in Dothan, Alabama.
Dothan, Alabama, in 1956, and she liked me for some reason, and she wanted to convert me because she knew that I did not realize just how bad the N's were, and she used the word consistently, and she said some very crude things, which I will tell you about at another point. And she felt thoroughly justified in doing this. This is how deep, and I want to use the word visceral hatred of blacks that these people had. And at some point, I would like to explore that. But as I said, I'm interested today in looking at what is going on in the country now when you have all of these people believing absolutely crazy things involving African Americans, like the first African American president not being born in America. And I will say in all polling, most Republicans, not Southerners, not whites, Republicans believe that Obama was not born in the United States, which is absolutely absurd. And guess who was behind that whole thing? Donald Trump.
Trump.
The Trump.
That's what brought him to the real national forefront. Was he pushed that and pushed it, and he lied, just like he does about everything practically. He lied about sending his people to Hawaii to get all of this.
Well, you can't believe what they're finding.
Have you heard anything
Absolute
about
bullshit.
these people that he sent to Hawaii?
What did they find?
Why don't you, at one of these rallies, ask him where the information is that he got from his people that went to Hawaii to find that Barack Obama was not born in Hawaii, which, by the way, is a part of the United States.
That may have been the problem.
Maybe that was the problem.
A lot of Trump supporters didn't know Hawaii was part of the United States. 1959, I believe, they became a state. So, anyway.
But a lot of this, what Pat is talking about, just really dumbfounds African Americans. And we were talking earlier about a lot of the projections that many whites put on other groups.
Now, wait a minute. I need to interrupt you.
Okay.
All groups do that to other groups. It's not whites. It's any superior group toward the subordinate group. And that occurs everywhere in all societies.
Everywhere. Right. Even among all black
groups. Yeah, absolutely.
Among Hispanic groups. Among Jewish groups. Yeah, he's right. So I'm glad he corrected me with that. That the dominant group usually projects its sins and
their foibles,
things
that are wrong with them. They say, it's not us, it's those blacks that are promiscuous, it's those blacks that are thieves, it's those blacks that are lazy. It's not us.
It's them. And this I think goes back to when Pat and I were discussing this earlier, to slavery. When the slaves were killing themselves in the fields, eating the worst of the food, taking care of Miss Ann, that's the white people that my generation called white people, who we worked for. And like the slaves took care of the babies, they took care of everything. And yet, what came out of that about the slaves? We had to beat them because they were lazy. We had to do this because they were lazy. We had to do that because we are the people with all of the, what's the word I can use? With all of the knowledge and all of, we had everything because we weren't lazy. But it was those lazy black slaves that we had to have take care of us. They cooked, they picked cotton, they did everything.
Raised children,
even nursed them.
Jimmy Carter, in his autobiography, talks about being raised on a southern peanut farm, part of the aristocracy in the local area, and all of his playmates were black. And around the age of 12, he saw the difference. Suddenly, his black playmates, I remember one thing he said, rather than rush headlong through the gate, they would stop and hold the gate open for him. The kid's parents, it wasn't the parents of Jimmy Carter, the parents of the black children were saying, you can't treat Master Carter that way. You have to give him special
Remember
attention.
the order of things.
Remember the order of things. Yeah. Really powerful kind of things. But
so I'm looking at this, and with the whole thing about affirmative action and everything that the Southern Jeffrey Beauregard Sessions
Jefferson president of the Confederacy
is attempting to do now is to turn back the affirmative action. Now let me tell you, many African Americans know this, is that African Americans, hard work is not always what gets you to the middle class or the upper middle class. Because if hard work was what did it, the majority of African Americans would be middle class and upper middle class. Because all of us know, and anyone like my husband who has been associated with African Americans for any length of time knows how hard African Americans work. But who does the majority group decide that they're going to pick out? They're going to pick out the smaller group that is not doing, or that they project is not doing, because as the guy in, was it New Mexico, when they had the thing, and he said that he passed through Vegas, somewhere in Vegas where the African Americans live, and they'd all be sitting on the porch. How does he know they haven't been working all day? And white people in the South sit on the porch all the time. But to put that on a whole group of people, and then to say, what I see as an African American person and how hard I worked. I picked cotton at 7 years old. Then I started working for whites when I got to Phoenix. From Stanfield to Phoenix, I started ironing at 9 for white people for 50 cents an hour. And my mother did day work, but I was 9 and I was ironing for 50 cents an hour. I stood on my feet 10 hours every Saturday to iron white shirts and clothes for very wealthy white people out in North Phoenix. Now, to say that I was lazy, and I knew many of my friends picked cotton. They were picking cotton at 9 years old, or picking fruit and things like that their parents did to just get by. So then I went to, by the time I was 11, I started working for this family, and they were the Coglins. He was chief of staff at St. Joseph's Hospital. And I worked for them from the time that I was 11 to 18. Now, I started out ironing, then I started house cleaning and babysitting. So then Mrs. Coglin started this hope chest for me. And I thought,
maybe you should explain what a hope chest is, because some younger people might not know what that is.
A hope chest was preparing you for marriage. So you were put these things like dishes, silverware, glasses, sheets, towels, all of those things in this chest, preparing you for when you were married and had your own home. Well, I thought that was really nice of her to do that. And then, and she also started paying my Social Security, which was wonderful, because my Social Security is pretty good now. But at the time, I did not understand why she was doing it. So I asked for, when I got to be 18, I asked for a raise. Because I thought, okay, now I'm 18, I'm a woman, I should be getting $1 an hour. She had moved me up to 75 cents, but I thought I should get $1 an hour. And she said no, so I quit. Well, when I introduced her, now they had said I was just like a member of the family. So then when I got engaged to Pat, I called them and I took Pat out to their home. And they were cordial and, and very nice to him and everything. But when I got ready to get married and I sent them an invitation, crickets. I never heard from them again. And I said, oh. So then I ran into her after my son was born in Park Central, here in Phoenix. Park Central was the first...
it was a big mall.
It was the first mall here in Phoenix. And I ran into her, and she acted like she was afraid of me. she would look around and see who was looking at her, talking to me, and I just follow her around the store, because by now I'm saying, okay, we got this. So I'd follow her around the store, and I was telling her about my son. So this was 1969 probably, because I think Jeff was older. He was born in 68. And so I followed her around the store and everything, and I'm telling her all about my life, because now I had become a teacher, and I was going into the master's program at ASU. So I was all excited to tell her this. So let me go back to the Hope Chest and Social Security. So then I realized she did not think that I was going to go to college or do anything like that. I was going to get married and have a bunch of kids. This was the reason she had started the Social Security and the Hope Chest. And as I said, I'm forever grateful that she started my Social Security as young as I was. But again, this brings me back to the point that Pat was talking about, is the idea that we couldn't do African Americans, or were we were black then?
When?
In the late 60s, early 70s, we had started calling ourselves black. That blacks couldn't do anything that was worthy. Let me go back to high school. Phoenix South Mountain High School. Even though I was a good student, I was involved in everything. None of the counselors ever said to me, Letha, what college are you going to? It just so happened that a group of us African American students said we were going to go to college. So we did go to college, and we often laugh about this, that the group of us went to college, but I don't think anybody ever said to us, maybe the guys, if they were going to play sports in college, because that was the big thing, but for the girls, we were just kind of left out. But again, this gets back to the point of where we are now with Donald Trump and projecting your shortcomings onto other groups. African Americans are lazy. African Americans don't know how to manage their own lives. African Americans have lots of babies. African American men are gone. And that gets back to why African American men were not, because of the laws that white people made that got them out of the home. But I look at all that is going on now with Donald Trump, and I am just, I don't know. I'm speechless, because, as Pat said, this started with the Supreme Court with desegregation. And it's been going on ever since. And whites have developed this anger about seeing other groups that they have said, they're not as good as we are. And then you see, when you take all of those laws that you made to keep us in our place, when you remove those and we begin to move up,
exactly,
then you begin to say, oh, they're getting everything. They want everything free from the government. They want this. Well, let me tell you, my parents could not get food stamps, or what is it called? When you get food stamps and stuff from welfare. My parents couldn't get welfare. And I was talking to my girlfriend Jean just the other day, and she said, no, we couldn't get welfare.
Well, let me interrupt just for a second to give you an institutional take on this. So this is not impressionistic. When I started working, my first professional job was as a social worker at County Welfare Department, and I processed applicants who came in looking for assistance, right?
Before you get into that, let's tell them to subscribe and like us and subscribe.
We already did that.
Yeah, but we're going to do it again. Like us and subscribe so that we can keep this going. Okay. Now go ahead.
Well, the point is that the workers who had been working there for quite some time said, we only just started giving welfare to minorities, to Hispanics and blacks. That just started a few years earlier. Now, the joke was, before that, the welfare just went to the girlfriends of state legislators. Well,
That's funny.
But the point is that, and I think I mentioned earlier in another episode, and forgive me if I repeat a few of my stories, I'm 75 years old, we tend to do that, that my wife's father had lost a couple of homes, and he also did not have, the ability to use the equity in his home to help my wife get through college. Now, my mother did me. She was able to use equity in her home, the mortgage. She had a mortgage. Doesn't everyone have a mortgage? It was only recently, and the book I read it in is right down here next to my wife. I did not know this. Blacks could not get mortgages. And I swear I said this earlier. Conservatives who want government out of everything have a point sometimes, because it was the federal government that said FHA loans cannot go to blacks. That's why my father-in-law could not get a mortgage. He had to have what's called a contract, which was a very different matter and did not build wealth.
Equity.
Equity, right. Where most whites in this country built their wealth out of the home that they bought via a mortgage. And that was closed to blacks until relatively recently. And
well, let's talk about our home. When we sold it in 1973 in South Phoenix, and we were just looking at it today, and the realtor, who was African American, and we had a nice home, and she put it up for $20,500, and we just looked at it today. And when she went downtown to the real estate board, they said, you can't sell a house in that area for that.
And just remember, we were living in a black area, because at that time we've told you this before, how we would be turned down when she would show up. Okay, it wasn't until the Civil Rights Act, but it takes years after an act is passed before people start really following it. So anyway,
so she came back and said, we can't sell the house for that, even though she had sold it to a family for the $20,000.
And I happen to know that I worked with the lady who bought the house.
And it's still a nice house in South Phoenix. But these are the things that many people don't know. And this is what Pat and I want this YouTube to be about. We want you to look at where we are now and how we got here, because we didn't just get here, and that there were laws set up to keep African Americans in their place. Blacks couldn't get loans in South Phoenix if you were black. People talked about, and whites, go ahead.
It's called redlining.
Redlining. Okay. And whites often talked about blacks having cars versus homes, or they had a better car than they did a home. It's because white folk would sell them cars, but they couldn't get a loan to buy a home.
Right.
These are laws that whites made to make themselves feel like we are better than the blacks.
What I would like to do, and I don't know what our time is at this point, but 2 minutes, okay. What I would like you to do is, as Letha said, like and subscribe, make comments, ask questions, share. Okay.
Share the video.
Share the video. Oh, with other people.
Talk about it. Tell people.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Spread the word. Spread the word. All right. So, what I would like to do, though, is to discuss this issue of the motivation. Why do things like this happen? And I want to be sure while we need to focus on the relationships among African Americans and the whites in this country, those were the two dominant groups up until the 50s, say.
Right.
And then now that's changing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hispanics are actually a larger minority group than African Americans.
Mm-hmm.
But what is behind this? What's the motivation? All countries, as I pointed out, go to India, look at the caste system there.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to take a look at what are the dynamics, the psychology behind this stuff. This is where it gets very personal. Why do Trump supporters believe that they're falling behind?
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's assuming, when I say Trump supporters, that the person is white. There are Trump supporters, interviews with Trump supporters and so forth, and it's always a matter of we're falling behind, we're losing out, white people can't catch a break. That's what's it? Reverse discrimination.
Reverse discrimination.
I was watching AM Joy this morning, and they got into that, and they had two Republicans on that said this stuff that Trump is doing is horrible. You know. So anyway.
But again, we want this YouTube or this program with us to be a teaching, to learn how we got to where we are and why we feel, and research backs us up about why many whites, and we're proven right because, as I said, the Attorney General is now looking at affirmative action. And how can you reverse something in 50 years that has gone on for 350 years? Okay? And during that 50 years, there have been roadblocks every step of the way. And there are still roadblocks because white people are still in control. There are still roadblocks that the powers that be are using. Voter suppression. You can use fishing license. Is it a fishing license that you can
hunting
use?
license.
A hunting license, but you cannot use a college registration to vote. Now, these are things.
That's in Texas.
That's in Texas. And
That's
these
big
are
surprise.
things that we hope you begin to check out to see how stumbling blocks are put in the way and have been put in the way of people.
Don't forget, in addition,
Mm-hmm.
to like, subscribe, share, and comment. Please.
Please comment, because we would like to know if you would like for us to talk more about this, because we would like to see what you have to say about this and see if we are on the right track, or if there's something you disagree with us about. Please email. How do we get to it? Like, subscribe, comment, and let us know, and we will respond to that. Okay, you see, we have to ask our producer because I'm not sure about how we're doing it. So we're going to sign off now?
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay, goodbye.